This week's blog post is my timeline from 1900 to 2021, Part 8, covering 1970 to 79. This is the 8th of 12 posts with an illustrated decade-by-decade timeline for the years 1900 to 2021. For more on that, see my website. This post is a teaser. It is not the full text for 70 to 79. To receive a PDF of the text for this decade, join my free email list by going to the URL that's on the screen. Here are some of the events of the decade 1970 to 79. In this decade, average inflation was 7% annually, with a high of 13% in late 1979. In 1970, the Social Security tax, which had been 2% when it was instituted in 1937 under FDR, rises to 9.6% following the institution of Medicare and Medicaid. Around 1970, we see a rise in terrorist groups, kidnapping, bombing, arson, including the Red Brigades, the Baader-Meinhof Gang, the Weather Underground, and the Symbionese Liberation Army. In 1970, Greenpeace employs passive resistance against nuclear testing, nuclear power, commercial whaling, global warming, deforestation, GMOs, deep-sea mining, chlorinated water, and so on. In 1972, there is a burglary and wiretap at the Democratic Party's Washington headquarters in the Watergate complex. President Nixon is implicated, and he resigns in 1974. In 1973, in the Roe v. Wade case, striking down many federal and state abortion laws, the Supreme Court rules that the right to privacy applies to a pregnant woman who chooses to have an abortion. But to balance her right against the government's interest in protecting women's health and prenatal life, that's what they said, the ruling states that abortions are unrestricted only during the first trimester. States can impose regulations in the second trimester, and no abortions are allowed in the third trimester unless the mother's life or health is at stake. 1973, the last U.S. troops leave Vietnam. Of the 58,500 Americans who died in Vietnam, more than half were drafted. In 1973-74, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, puts a 6-month embargo on oil exports to countries that were supporting Israel in the Yom Kippur War, which began in August 73. In 1973-74, there's a stock market crash. The Dow Jones loses more than 45% of its value, the most since the Great Depression. 1975, in O'Connor versus Donaldson, the Supreme Court rules that those who are deemed mentally ill cannot be confined involuntarily if they are not a danger to the public or themselves. That has particular relevance to New York City. In 1979, an accident at 3 Mile Island in central Pennsylvania leads to a sharp reduction in the number of nuclear power plants under construction. And 1979 to 81, we had the Iran hostage crisis. 66 diplomats, mostly Americans, were held hostage for 444 days in Tehran. Under the heading Science, Technology, and Health, in 1973, 3 babies were born via in vitro fertilization. 1977, the earliest personal computer appeared, the Apple II. The first complete DNA genome was sequenced, and the first genetically engineered organisms were produced. In books, we had Eric Segal's Love Story, 1970. Love means never having to say you're sorry. We also had Alex Haley's Roots, 1976, a historical fiction based on Kunta Kinte, an African sold into slavery, and 7 generations of his descendants in the U.S. down to Haley. Also published, Norman Mailer's The Executioner's Song, 1979, the story of Gary Gilmore, who murdered 2 men in Utah and became the first person executed after the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. In the visual arts, Chuck Close creates oversized images that are composed of a mosaic of smaller images. Douglas Hubler, in his Variable Piece series and Duration Piece series, combines documentary photos with typed text. And we have performance art, where the artist's actions are the art. For example, for a shoot, in 1971, Chris Burden arranged for someone to shoot him in the arm with a rifle. In architecture, Yamasaki's World Trade Center towers were completed in '73 and were briefly the world's tallest buildings, with 110 stories in each tower. World Trade Center 1, with the mast, rose to 1,368 feet, 417 meters. It was surpassed a year later, 1974, by the Sears Tower, now the Willis Tower in Chicago, by Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, which rose to 1,450 feet, 442 meters, so about 30 meters more. In the movies, among the top grossing films are The Godfather, 1972, Star Wars, 1977, and Grease, 1978. TV had adventure, nostalgia, and edginess, All in the Family, Happy Days, Charlie's Angels. In music, Simon and Garfunkel's Bridge Over Troubled Water came out in 1970, Jesus Christ Superstar, 1971, Fleetwood Mac's Rumors, 1977. Long-term bestsellers, which weren't bestsellers at the time, include Meat Loaf's Bat Out of Hell, 1977, and Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, 1973. Styles include disco, punk, new wave, heavy metal, arena rock, funk, quiet storm, early hip-hop, and many more. And the most popular device for music consumption was the Sony Walkman cassette player with headphones. That's it for this week's timeline. DianeDuranteWriter.com has hundreds of posts on sculpture, painting, architecture, and my other obsessions. To join the free Sunday Recommendations email list, visit the URL on the screen or email me. And you can say, "Well done, Diane," or support my work and receive rewards by means of the tip jar on DianeDuranteWriter.com. As always, thank you for listening.